Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of the Jason Howell Company Speaker Series Zoominars. My name is Jason Howell. Today's topic is turning wealth preservation into family preservation. So many of our first-generation wealth clients become more concerned about losing their clients or losing their family members to distrust, to jealousy, to anger, more concerned about that than actually losing their new wealth itself. Today, we'll talk about how to mitigate that pressure, the guilt, the expectations placed on first-generation success stories that we normally work with. With me today is financial therapist Dr. Shaywana, or Dr. Shay Harris-Pierre. She brings with her a wealth of expertise. You see what I did there? In marriage counseling, family therapy, and of course, psychology. Before we pick her brain, let's just meet Dr. Shay. So Dr. Shay, welcome to the Zoominar. How has your day been so far?
It's been pretty good. It's been a busy day, lots of meetings and clients, etc. But I'm here.
You're here. You're here. Are most of your days typically pretty busy?
Yeah, recently my days have been pretty packed. It's been client after client, meetings, talking with new people, just a lot of different things happening for me now.
And usually, are you meeting with multiple family members at a time, or thankfully, is it just like a patriarch or a matriarch?
Well, sometimes it's a little bit of both. I'll see an individual sometimes, or couples, or even some families, adult children and their parents too.
Okay. All right. That does make for a very interesting and probably
Oh, yeah.
taxing day, that's my guess.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I earn my rest at the end of the day.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we're certain that you do. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share our screen and we're going to get started here. All right. If you came to turning wealth preservation into family preservation, you came to the right Zoominar. Welcome. Dr. Shay, once again, we're so happy that you are here today. If anyone has questions as we go through our presentation, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll prioritize your questions over ours. But once again, I just want to say thank you for being here. And before we get started, we'll just have a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor, of course, today is the Jason Howell Company. We're a family wealth management firm specializing in sustainable investing and family governance. We're able to compete with some of the most well-known private bank and private wealth advisors by forming a virtual family office with a team of experts and specialists, experts much like Dr. Shay. We're based in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., but we serve clients nationwide. For more about the Jason Howell Company, just go to jasonhowell.com. And with that, we'll turn our attention now to Dr. Harris-Pierre. So you've got a lot of education here, Dr. Shay, and some people these days talk about education being, or college being, a little bit of waste of a time. You decided not only to major in a very difficult topic, but to get all your academic knowledge all the way through, all the way to the end, essentially. What drove that decision to get so much education to focus in this area?
That's a really interesting question. And the way that you phrased it is very awesome as well, because the reason that I got the degrees that I did get, like as far as a terminal degree and the field that I entered, I'll go back to my father. And so I lost my father when I was around 6, but in those 6 years that I had him, he really instilled the importance of education. And so throughout the course of my life, I knew that I wanted to get a terminal degree. I knew that education was very important to me, but also in losing my father, I was exposed to mental health counselors and like grief professionals, and that level of help and assistance through the grieving process led me to wanting to go into a mental health field, and led me into kind of the helping professionals or the helping profession in the mental health sphere. So
Wow. So a personal experience, number one, drove you getting into this profession. And then your dad, on all of 6 years, was amazing.
yeah.
Really reinforced education. Now all of us fathers feel terrible because we haven't done enough with our toddlers to ensure that they go all the way like you did. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you
no,
for
I'm
sharing.
sure all of the fathers have done quite enough. You probably have done more than you think you've done.
Working on it. Always a work in progress, as any parent would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us, what is a board approved supervisor? I know you recently moved here to the Virginia area from Texas, and you are board approved now in Virginia, but I don't think many people know what that means.
Yes. So, as a licensed professional counselor, a fully licensed individual, not a resident of counseling, I'm no longer under supervision. And so I am free to practice freely without supervision. Now, the state of Virginia approves supervisors to supervise residents in counseling. And pretty much what a board approved supervisor means is that I have the knowledge, skills, and experience to take someone under my wing or a few someones under my wing and kind of show them the ropes of the profession as they are freshly graduated from their master's program and like usher them into the field by providing clinical supervision to them.
So you serve somewhat like a mentor to new
Yeah.
psychologists.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, to new licensed professional counselors. Yep.
No, that's amazing. The word expert certainly fits here. Always nice when the word expert actually fits versus someone just calling themselves an expert. Well,
Yeah.
certainly here you've got psychology, you've got the master's, you got the PhD. People
Mhm.
tend to know what those degrees are. Not everyone knows what a certified financial therapist is. Give us a little
Mhm.
color about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for the past few years, or yeah, the past few years or so, I have been running and practicing out of my own private practice, Shades of You Counseling and Consulting. And in that practice, I see a lot of high achieving women of color. Those are my kind of go-to clients that I see in my counseling practice. And in my work with that population, I started to notice some themes of issues with money, issues with cross-class growth. So the idea of growing up in one socioeconomic status or one socioeconomic group, and then throughout the course of their life, getting a different type of job and education, et cetera, existing currently in their adult life in a different socioeconomic group. And so that led me to, as any good clinician does, do some really good research in the area. And I found that financial therapy is a thing. And so I did a little bit more digging to, of course, best help my clients, but to also kind of see how I can leverage my experience and my background to best serve, other clients. And that's how I came across the Financial Therapy Association and became certified as a financial therapist.
No, it's exactly that's fantastic. And you have the word trauma in your bio. And I
Mhm.
appreciate the focus on women of color. Last week was Juneteenth for anyone who's watching this in real time and anytime current. And I had the opportunity to go to New York and sit with a number of Black certified financial planners as we celebrated over at BlackRock, and had a few days of discussion. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was this idea within first generation wealth, which is, essentially our specialty, this idea of dealing with trauma. And I love the phrase, it's a new phrase for me, cross class growth. That idea, and that cross class can happen within the family, can it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It sure can. And that can cause issues or, contention in the family system, or it can be something that can, cause a sense of healing or growth in the family system.
If you have a good clinician that's out there working with you,
Absolutely.
which is
Yes.
some of the work you do. Well, let's get into it. I'm very excited to have some of the Q&A with you here. My first question that's here is, how do you, as an expert, as a doctor, define financial therapy, and how does that relate to family systems theory, another phrase that I've come across in study?
Yes. So my personal definition of financial therapy is in any therapeutic conversation that exists at the intersection of emotions, relationships, and money. Now, the FTA, the Financial Therapy Association, or other groups, other organizations may not have the relationship piece in their definition, but to me, because I have my background in marriage and family therapy, and my experience clinically with couples and families and even individuals, my own lens, my own professional lens, dictates that every relationship, every therapeutic relationship is a relational one. And so I can't leave out the relationships piece, especially when it comes to talking about money and finances, because a lot of, as individuals, so much of our belief systems, so much of our values related to money come from what we've learned, our internalized messages, the things that have been modeled for us, and what, usually that is from our family of origin or the people closest to us. And so, no individual exists within a vacuum. And that's kind of the core idea of family systems theory, is that families exist as a system in that every individual excuse me, serves a purpose and influences and is influenced by the other people within the system. And so I think, financial therapy is inherently systemic for those reasons.
Got it. And yeah, and you were saying that, when it comes to the formality of the study of this topic, emotions and money almost always there, but you've added this piece of relationships, which sounds perfect to me because, like you said, I'm reading what I wrote down here. Every therapeutic relationship is a relational one, and we're not, essentially living in a vacuum, which is so true.
Yeah. And even in my clinical work that I do with couples, families, and even individuals, that's a focus of mine. I like to tell my clients that we like to talk about your relationship to yourself, to others, but also your relationship to money. And a lot of people don't quite always think about their relationship to themselves when they think about relationships. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially when you're thinking about emotions and how you navigate them.
I thought you were going to say most people don't think about their relationship with money. Have you found that to be the case, that they do?
Not necessarily. I mean, I
Not
would say
either.
that maybe second place is the relationship to money on the forgotten
Okay.
relationships list. Because people don't necessarily think about relationship to money as something to have a relationship with. And that's a lot of the work I do as a financial therapist, is helping people to understand what that looks like. Understand, that money can be a tool, or it can be an asset, or it can, for some people, be an idol, or like something to worship. And once we have an understanding of what their perception is of money and what their relationship is to it, and what maladaptive patterns might come as a result of that relationship, then we can interrupt that and do some real good work.
Well, thank you for sharing that. A lot of times when people think of financial therapy who may not be clued into what it really does, what it really is for, I think the default is that people who would be clients are coming from a place of lack.
Yeah.
And as a financial advisor, we almost have this curated group that come in front of us, essentially of people who have abundance. They may still have a lack maybe mindset, but they actually have the resources, and that ends up being something for them to navigate as well. So how can those next generation family members, sometimes they're first generation, but sometimes it's what they call G2, G3. How can that generation of family well navigate the dynamics that they're going to be exposed to now that these resources are present in their life?
Yeah, absolutely. So the shortest answer would be to enlist the help of a financial therapist or a family dynamics consultant like myself, but that's a shameless plug. But
We'll
I
take
think
it. We'll take it.
um, but to answer the question, actually, the biggest thing or the first step would be understanding family dynamics, understanding for a next generation family member, a G2, understanding what the rules and the roles are, and like how the family operates currently, and what patterns are existing in the family as a result of those rules and norms and boundaries that currently exist within the system. And once you have an understanding of kind of the lay of the land, then you can understand what those maladaptive patterns are, the things that, the patterns that the cycles that a family might get caught up in that gets them further and further from the goals that they want to achieve. You can identify those things and you can interrupt them in whatever way that, is most beneficial. That's honestly the core of the work that I do is identifying patterns that exist within systems and interrupting them for the sake of, meeting goals.
Wow, that's you're one of the people that I have to write the most notes for when speaking to. Be careful when having a PhD on your Zoominars. And so
I know, I hope I'm not, I hope I'm not speaking too much. I can get a
you're
bit
doing a
verbose.
great job. You're doing a great job. This is a learning. We're all learning. So number one, simplify this. Hire a financial therapist. I'd say the same if you had a problem with finance. Hire a financial advisor. Hire a good one. But if you wanted to kind of walk through this and try to understand what a financial therapist does, one of the things that you do is you look at the rules and the roles and the norms and the boundaries of these family members, and you look at the cycle that the families are caught in, and you interrupt them. I thought that was poignant. The idea that you are identifying a cycle, which takes work, and then you're doing the hard work, maybe that a family member themselves can't do, and you're literally interrupting that cycle, I guess, to change it. Isn't that how habits work? And I don't know, other things work that way. You have to stop it or interrupt the cycle so it won't repeat.
Absolutely. Yes. And I really appreciate that you mentioned that sometimes a family member might not be able to do that. It sometimes takes an outside person to be able to fully see, to like zoom out and see the lay of the land and be able to interrupt those cycles. Because again, if someone is a part of the system, they already have their role that is attached to them. They have their expectations that are attached to them. And those expectations might not include interrupting certain patterns. But yeah, a lot of the work that I do is, looking from the outside in, understanding what those cycles are and interrupting them in a way that is again beneficial to the family system overall and in a way that creates a different way of interacting. So it's not just, stop, don't do that. It's, hey, how can we get this need met or how can we meet this goal in a way that's beneficial for everyone?
For many family members, they're highly cognizant that there's a penalty for interrupting the
Mhm.
cycle. Have you seen
Yeah.
that?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of fear and yeah, fear and anxiety that comes as a result of trying to like having a need in a system and not getting that need met, but not knowing how or not wanting to or being afraid of advocating for yourself and the need that you have. And that can cause a lot of distance between family members and issues in family systems.
Great. Well, a best case scenario for people is number one, to have the knowledge of all this stuff, which is nearly impossible when you have other careers, other ways you've made your money as clients. And so they'll hire a financial advisor, they're hiring an estate planner, all strategic partners of a typical wealth management firm. I look at you, Dr. Shea, and I think, well, one of the things that is distinct is you're able to work with this family in a way that's a little less traditional, at least less traditional than most people are used to,
Mhm.
and and essentially get into some of these topics that are difficult for numbers oriented or legally oriented people. So how do you structure a family meeting that will include finances, but in your case, emotions and relationships?
Yeah, so a lot of, there are different kinds of family meetings that might exist, but the structure of them can really be the same. So ideally, before the actual meeting itself, we establish the who, what, where, when, and why, of course, who's going to be involved, who are the stakeholders, what is the content of the meeting, where we're going to meet, when, and, again, what are the goals? And then in the actual meeting with a family that is talking about finances or the emotional pieces around finances, the structure itself can look like setting an agenda, um, setting goals for the meeting. I think that's something that can often get overlooked, is setting goals for the meeting, so you don't just sit and talk about things or sit and talk about feelings and get caught up in um, kind of taking left turns, and then next thing you know, everything is, somebody's flipping a table or something.
Right, right. Rabbit
Yeah.
holes and
Right.
long-standing issues that maybe aren't as relevant.
Yes, exactly. So setting goals helps to drive the focus of the meeting, and then clarifying the roles and the expectations, which is another really important piece when you're talking about emotions. And when you're talking about like family enterprises and family business, those things can get a little blurry when we're talking about roles and expectations. So having a clear idea of what's happening in this meeting and what are the goals and who's playing what role and what are the expectations for each person. And then, of course, going through each of the agenda items, having difficult conversations around, the dynamics or the patterns that exist within the family. And through that part of the meeting, my role is to facilitate the conversation, allow space for every person to speak and to feel heard. And again, like I mentioned before, identify and interrupt those patterns that I'm starting to notice, that I notice coming out, specifically the patterns that are going to be that are going to impede the goals that the clients have. And then after that, we move into action. What are we going to do as a result of this? And that, I think, I don't want to step on your toes, but I think that kind of goes into the next question of how I work with financial advisors and estate planners, because that's the action piece is where the emotional stuff gets transferred to the financial stuff. And of course, I'm, as you mentioned, I'm an expert, but I am not an expert in the dollar signs.
The
I'm
dollar
an expert
signs.
in the feelings.
Well, the thing that you are an expert in is it sounds like being a little patient too, because you mentioned meetings with an S on the end. This isn't a one meeting and you're done, is it?
Absolutely not. No, I wish, I tell my
That would
clients
be
all the time, I wish that I had like a magic wand and I can just bibbity bobbity boo and everything is perfect. But that's not how it operates. It's like growing a muscle, you have to practice these things. And as we mentioned earlier, interrupting patterns can be really difficult. It's like kind of carving a new path in a forest. It takes time and it takes practice and it takes effort. So.
I had the opportunity to take a course that was focused on and in this area. And one of the things that stood out to me, you had mentioned setting goals and expectations and roles. And
Yeah.
one would think that would be for, the corpus, for the money or for whatever else. But what they were alluding to is what you are, which is there are multiple meetings. And so because of that, there's a goal for this meeting, which might just be to have discussion, not to actually
Yeah.
settle anything, but that could be the goal. And then the next meeting maybe could be to make a decision about something. And then the next meeting might be implementation. So there's seemingly within each kind of meeting, you set up goals and expectations and roles, even if it doesn't mean to be definitive by the end of it.
Absolutely. Even if the goal doesn't have a finish line for, the end of one particular meeting. Yes, definitely. And the baby steps are important. And, anything is progress.
Anything is progress. That's a quote I can write down. Anything is progress. Well, you started to talk about how you might work with, be it financial advisors, estate planners, maybe others. Literally, how do you do that? I'm a financial advisor. I've got this family of clients here. I can see that more discussion need be had, or especially an estate planner who's asking questions about after death, what would you like to happen? Where do you come in? Would you prefer this be something that you'd come in early in the process, or are you fine to come in after the estate plan is drawn up, after the financial plan is drawn up?
Mhm. Ideally, my work is at the outset of any work with a financial professional. Because if I can get in and help a client, help a family to kind of set some expectations, develop some insight around what's going on in the family system, that in itself can kind of lay the groundwork for doing all of the other stuff a bit easier. In conversations that I've had with other financial professionals, they have all mentioned to some extent issues with a client knowing what they want to do, or knowing kind of the outset of what they want, their goals, but the behavior that leads to that goal is often separate. There's often a chasm between knowing what they want and doing the things to get what they want. And I like to think that the work that I do kind of helps to bridge the gap over that chasm, in that I remove those emotional hurdles that might exist in a family system that can keep it from meeting its financial goals, or meeting its wealth transfer goals, or, succession planning goals, those types of things. I come in and I remove those hurdles. And I know that, that's the ideal thing. Like, I could come in and, try and remove those roadblocks before they become an issue. But there are also families that run into the roadblocks, and that's when they seek assistance. And so in those issues, or in those instances, helping the families to see what, again, their patterns are and interrupting them. That's kind of where I step in.
This sounds like such hard work, and it's seemingly in some cases impossible work. Would you say there's a percentage of families that a person with your expertise may engage, and you may get to a point where the reality is that the patriarch, the matriarch, they're not going to change, they're not going to bend, they're not going to hear the other family members, and you just may as well pull out, or they ask you to pull out? Has that happened?
Oh yeah, I've been fired. And I don't take it personally, because there's there's a level of vulnerability and a level of work that goes into doing this kind of work, and it's not for everyone. Um, and so for people who are willing to do the work, there is immense, reward on the other side. But it is also very hard. Removing those hurdles is very hard. Building that bridge, it's very hard. Kind of facing past traumas and relational issues, and problems in families with the people who are, closest to you. That's really hard. It's hard stuff. And so inflexibility can be a huge deterrent to doing this kind of work. And flexibility is a huge um, flexibility in itself is very necessary for, doing this kind of work.
I wrote that down because I have a presentation later this year about working with clients who have a higher level of complexity. And it strikes me as a reality that there isn't always as much vulnerability and flexibility necessary for that client who's, just in that path, saving up just enough for retirement, versus that client who may have an exorbitant amount of wealth accumulated that will pass down to the next generation, maybe two generations down. And now
Mhm.
there's a major, not only conversation to have, major decisions to make, because these resources will distort without guidance. It's just different, isn't it, once you move up that complexity and wealth chain?
Oh, absolutely. Because there's, coming from a systems perspective, I could say that even the most complex family still has its connections, or like can still be conceptualized in a basic systems way. But there are so many things that contribute to the dynamics that exist within a system, and how one person's behavior might influence another person's, or one person's wealth and what they do with it. And who they decide to leave it to, or who they don't decide to leave it to, how that all plays a role in relationships, and who likes who and who doesn't like who, or the sibling rivalry, or all kinds of things. There's so many possibilities that show up, especially in those more complex cases where there's an exorbitant amount of wealth.
Dr. Shea, we titled this presentation around, focus on family preservation over just wealth
Mhm.
preservation. So the last question I have here for you is, how do you see your profession essentially keeping families together when they are facing for their surname an unprecedented wealth transfer? And feel free to make that bigger, because many people in our industry have been hearing about the upcoming wealth transfer from baby boomers to, who knows, they always forget about Generation X, but to millennials and Gen Z. And that's going to be quite an impact that's going to be happening very, I guess, what's the right word? Pretty consistently over the next 10, 20, 30 years as the baby boomers do leave their estates. So, how can people keep themselves together when this is happening? This is coming.
Yes. A lot of the work that I do is about facilitating relationships that have clear, open, and direct communication. And I think that communication in itself is at the core of keeping relationships together. Um, it's also extremely difficult to have. I mean, it might be surprising how difficult it is for people to communicate clearly, openly, and directly, especially given certain circumstances and given certain things that might keep them from, like we talked about earlier, the fears that they might have about expressing themselves clearly. But that's kind of one of the biggest things that I think is important when thinking about trying to keep a family together, having a solid understanding of what clear and direct communication looks like within a family. Um, I also think that having procedures in place, that family governance piece, having things in place and setting those things up early and having continuous conversations about what the procedures and the protocol and kind of the mission and the vision for the family, what that is and what that looks like, that can reduce or mitigate the tendency of some families to kind of fall apart when there's wealth transfer. Um, and that happens over time. Again, that's something that should be consistent throughout the lifespan of the family. And then if those things don't happen, again, shameless plug, bringing in a
Bring in a
professional,
therapist, for crying out loud.
bring in a
Can't do this
therapist.
yourself.
Yes,
Clear,
absolutely.
open, direct communication.
Yes.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, everyone brace yourself. We're going to come off this screen, go back to big faces. Dr. Shea, this has been educational. Certainly for me, I imagine for anyone that comes across this presentation, it will be for them. If there's a small takeaway that someone could bring to their home after listening to someone like you who's an expert in their field, what would you say that would be?
Hmm. Talk more.
Hmm.
Talk more, even if it doesn't feel right, or if it feels awkward, or if you feel like you're over communicating. Sharing how you feel is important, and that is very therapist of me. But talk about your feelings.
Talk more, share how you feel, talk
Yes,
about your
and
feelings,
if you can't, then bring in someone to help.
and bring someone in to help. We have to get this point across. Bring someone in to help. Quite important. Dr. Shea Harris Pierre, thank you so much for educating us today. I look forward to continuing to partner with you in the near future for our clients and for our network and the people that really need your expertise. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you very much.
And with that, I yield the balance of everyone's time. Bye for now.